Go back into South Bend's history. 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, and what do you see? You see groups of people working to bring change to this city. They had different ideas of what that change should be. They didn't always agree. Yet, in every decade, there were groups of people for whom positive change was their life's work. This podcast, South Bend's Own Words, features the voices of people who helped make this city change. We'll share clips from the oral histories done by the Indiana University South Bend Civil Rights Heritage Center that tell a more complete history of the city. It's the story of many cultures, not just one. It's the story of South Bend. Andre Buchanan's youth was historic in several ways. He grew up in South Bend's East Side African American community in a house that, today, is threatened by the rampant construction of the Eddy Street shopping areas right by the Trader Joe's. During the mid-1940s, when he was in the fourth grade, Andre was one of the first students of color to attend St. Joseph Catholic Grade School. Despite living and going to school on the east side of town, his family worshiped on the west side at the multiracial Saint Augustine's Catholic Church. Andre's father even helped build Saint Augustine's. In 2007, Indiana University South Bend student Imani Ingram and Professor Les Lamon sat down with Andre. They talked about his different treatments between predominantly white and black South Bend schools, his experiences with discrimination at places like the Natatorium, and his perspective as part of the East Side African American community.
Well, to start, Mr. Buchanan, I thought I might just ask you to, tell us a little bit about where you were born and sketch out your life story and how it connects to South Bend.
Well, I was born at 739 North Francis Street in 1936. My parents were James and Virginia Buchanan. I attended kindergarten through third grade at Pearly School. I then transferred to St. Joe, and we were the first African-American kids to go to St. Joe. I then went to Thomas Jefferson for the ninth grade and went to Central for the 10th, 11th, and 12th and graduated in 1954. I left South Bend in 1955.
You grew up, let's stay on the housing business. You grew up on the east side.
On the east side. House is still there, 739 North Francis.
Okay. All right. As we have learned about the history of South Bend and of the black communities in South Bend, we have, one thing is that there's been a distinction between African Americans who lived on the east side of South Bend and those who lived on the west side of South Bend. Was that a impression you had?
I'm sure I had the impression, but we had a lot of interpersonal relationships with people on the west side because I went to Saint Augustine's. And my family was one of the founding families at Saint Augustine. So we always had personal contact with people that lived on the west side and on the south side.
Would you say there was anything that distinguished the black community on the
Well,
east side?
I think the perception was that if you lived on the east side, that was pretty much the Beverly Hills of the black community. And so people had the perception that if you lived on the east side, you had money. That wasn't true. But only the people that lived on the east side seemed to know that wasn't true.
Would that have had anything to do with the impression that the people who lived on the west side were newcomers and the people on the east side were old timers?
Well, I'm not so sure. My grandmother lived on the lake. And my grandmother and my father came to South Bend in the 1920s. So she certainly wasn't a newcomer.
And how long did your grandmother live there?
Oh, she lived there for years. She always lived there, as far as I was. My earliest memories, she lived there.
Yeah.
In fact,
Standing house.
in my early childhood, they didn't have indoor plumbing and electricity, and the streets weren't paved, and like East Side streets weren't paved. Georgiana, Burns, and Dewey, which they're now knocking down, those were unpaved streets. And they had nice homes, the black people in that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's one of the characteristics of the civil rights movement in South Bend was to try to bring equal services to areas that were historically black.
Yeah.
Imani, did you have anything to follow up on that?
About the fair housing.
Yeah, or any particularly.
Yeah, as far as like your education when you going to school, you said you went to kindergarten
Through third grade at Pearl.
At Pearl. Okay. Now my question is, was the school segregated then?
The school was not segregated,
Okay.
although the attitudes of some of the teachers was terrible. I can remember, for instance, and my mother was a pretty fiery person. The teacher had my sister draw a picture of a pickaninny. And it was a class project that they did to draw pictures of pickaninnies. And I can remember my mother being irate and going to the school. And she sort of took matters into her own hands. And it wasn't an organized effort. She just felt that her daughter was being abused and disrespected. And she stormed over to the school.
And whatever came of that?
I don't know. I mean, she got an apology, certainly, and I'm sure the teacher never did it again, but it wasn't an organized effort or anything. It's just one parent protesting.
Okay, now you went to St. Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Now was that private school back then too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And your family was able to financially?
No, we were subsidized.
Okay.
We were subsidized.
And, so what issues did you have? Did you have any racial issues there that you encountered?
Well,
like you said, you were the first black to go there. Or any
there were always the remarks and the name calling. I'm not sure that wouldn't have happened in a public school because the public schools were predominantly white in South Bend. And so even in high school, the black kids ate in one part of the cafeteria. And it wasn't segregation. It was, people were comfortable with people who looked like them. And also, there was a certain amount of prejudice because you were friends with white kids in school, but you very rarely got invited to their homes. And they were pretty much banned from coming to the black neighborhoods. What motivated me to go to Central was I had gone to school with all white kids at St. Joe. From the 9th grade, I went to Jefferson. That was all white practically in those days. And I wanted to go to school with black kids. So I went to Central that had really I look back, it was really a minority because I think my graduating class was 8% African American. And that was 1954. So I think what they did was they were playing with the school district to keep Adams white. But at one time, it was like one side of Eddy Street, one side of South Bend Avenue, and they were just moving the boundaries around to keep it as white as possible.
Okay, what did your family do for recreation?
Well, we didn't do much because we didn't have a car.
Okay, well.
But it was mostly neighborhood things, and kids did things differently. We played stickball in the streets and hide and go seek at night. And we used the park, Coquillard Park. We used that park quite a bit. In those days, they used to have summer park. I don't know if they still do or not, but you went over there and you did arts and crafts kind of thing, you know, the little things where you make the pot holders, that kind of stuff. And they had organized sports teams that were sponsored by local businesses, baseball teams and whatnot. And they always had a ping pong table and volleyball and racquetball.
No discrimination there.
No,
I mean,
no.
Blacks and whites.
Blacks and whites played together.
and had equal access to
Yeah.
as well.
Well, they had equal access. I don't think they had equal treatment necessarily. It was basically family and neighborhood entertainment. Most public accommodations, well, restaurants and things were segregated for the most part. You just couldn't go.
Is that like in the downtown area?
All over the city.
All over the city. So is it a thing where you knew that's
You just don't go there.
okay?
You know, you just don't go there. And if you do, don't expect to get served.
Not that they had a sign posted.
Well, some places had we reserve the right to seat our customers. They had those signs. They didn't say no blacks allowed. They just said we reserve the right to seat our customers.
Are there any restaurants that come to mind that were particularly friendly or vigorously unfriendly?
Well, so I don't think any of the places on the east side, because there were no black businesses on the east side. If you wanted to go to a bar or something, you had to go across town.
As a high school aged, typical teenager, what activities were you involved in at Central?
I played intramural basketball, but I worked all through high school. I always had a job. So
Where'd you work?
I never worked any service jobs. My mother would never do that. My father worked at the bowling alley, which was attached to the Buchanan Hotel. And he used to always tell my mother, don't let those boys be be pin setters, because they throw the balls at them and everything. You know.
Yeah. What?
They weren't automated then.
Right.
You probably don't remember that. Like some of us, they had to put the pins down in the slots.
Yeah. And then you sat out, and they tried
above it. Yeah.
and they try to hit the black kids that were setting pins with the balls and the pins. And like that.
Yeah.
I was never allowed. My mother never allowed me to do several things. I couldn't set pins. I couldn't shine shoes. And I couldn't sell newspapers on the corner downtown, because she felt that the white men demeaned the kids. You know, they'd call them niggers and pat them on the head. And, you know, my mother didn't want me to be exposed to that.
As far as, did you have any experience with the Natatorium?
Well, my mother wouldn't allow me to go to the Natatorium, because we could only go on one night a week.
Your mother didn't want you to go because it was
like, you know, taking crumbs. And she was a pretty proud woman, so she didn't really want me to go. She wasn't too enthusiastic about me going.
Did it make a difference when it was finally desegregated?
I didn't go.
You didn't go.
I didn't go. I have been there, you know. I went, but it wasn't one of the activities that she encouraged. Well, it's sort of like when we integrated the Catholic elementary school system. It wasn't in the paper or anything. It just happened. And so when September came, we went to St. Joe. After we left, I think it was many years before any black kids went to St. Joe. Because, there weren't many black Catholics to begin with.
Catholics weren't very prominent in the South, and black Catholics were even less prominent.
Well, in Pascagoula, Mississippi, there were Creoles, which my family was Creoles. And they had the French influence, and they were Catholics. And the families who founded Saint Augustine were all from Pascagoula, Mississippi. I can remember, my father died when I was 6. But I can remember as a small child, he used to take me sometimes out to where St. Augustine's is when he was working on the church, building the church. And I just have vague memories of going out there with him.
I can't remember now exactly when it was, but
The church was established in 1928.
in the basement of St. Joe.
No. Well, yes, at first. But then when they had their own space, it was a storefront on Washington Street.
Oh, okay.
And I can vaguely remember going to that storefront to church. My father was an altar boy.
St. Augustine's is a remarkable institution.
Well, it stayed alive for almost 80 years or so.
And it's the only really, though it began as a result of kind of a segregated atmosphere.
Yeah.
I mean, it is genuinely integrated institution.
Yeah, it is.
And you can't find another church anywhere that matches that in this city. And plus, there's an awful lot of civil rights, activism and all. Father Tillman and others.
Yeah. Dan Pyle. Yeah. The only priest that I really remember was Father Sullivan, and I was very young then. And then Father Tillman was the primary priest.
Did you feel like when he came to visit your house that he was wanting you to go to St. Joe just because you were a Catholic family, or that he was very aware that you would also be the only black Catholic family?
I don't know, because we just went and registered, and some kids asked me if I had a tail, and but there was no publicity. There wasn't any follow-up. There wasn't any structured kind of counseling or anything. We just went, and that was that.
South Bend's Own Words was created by Kevin Tidmarsh and me, George Garner. This episode was produced by John Watson from the Ernestine M. Racklin School of the Arts at Indiana University South Bend, and by me through the Civil Rights Heritage Center. Visit us and learn how IU South Bend students inspired the transformation of a once segregated South Bend swimming pool. We give guided tours and offer public events that show how the history of oppression echoes through this city today. See and hear more history, plan your visit, or share your thoughts about this episode, all at crhc.iusb.edu.